I've been talking to Robbie a fair bit over the last few days and preparing for this conversation. And what started as the idea for this particular conversation started because Ben Pyle posted some really controversial stuff on LinkedIn, and people started saying nobody uses serverless for anything serious. And I thought, it would be worthwhile for the Believe in Serverless community to see real world serverless use cases and asked Robbie um, to start diving into some of his particular use cases. He, the more I talked to him about it, the more I realized that this is a fascinating tale with some incredible ups and downs. And if you want to learn more about it, a lot of the depth of this conversation is covered in a book by Sheen. Robbie's going to talk a little bit about that as well. But let's go ahead and get started. So Sheen also has a book. Robbie, I just would love to hear a brief intro of you and how you
Yep.
got started in this world.
Awesome. Well, hey everyone. My name is Robbie Kohler. I am currently Senior Director of Software Engineering at Taco Bell. My main focus is on the e-commerce platform, but I've kind of done a little bit of everything here. We'll talk about how I started at the company when there wasn't much. Um, but yeah, super excited to talk about serverless today, how we've used it, how we fully believe in it, especially at the enterprise level. Really exciting also to announce, and Khawaja mentioned this, Sheen's book, which we're all aware of and excited about. I think it's out on Kindle, or it is out on Kindle if you want to purchase now, called Serverless Development on AWS. Uh, Talk About is featured as one of the two case studies in there. I was super honored to be asked to do this. It's a funny story. I met Sheen for the first time in 2022 at reInvent. He asked to speak to me. I was incredibly nervous because I looked up to him as a mentor and everything. So we meet up at the coffee shop at Venetian, and he says one thing, and then I just go off for 45 minutes straight about what we do at Taco Bell and serverless. And I realized after 45 minutes he hasn't said much. He was kind of smiling. And he's like, "Oh, that's amazing. That's great and all. But the real reason I asked you here is I wanted to know if you'd be in a book that I'm writing as a case study." And I said yes before I got any approvals. I need to make this happen. That's amazing, and I was very honored. Sheen is one of the truly nice guys, amazing mentor, and very very thrilled and honored to be in the book. So if you want in-depth details, I go really in depth. Khawaja read it. It could be something as a guide, a cautionary tale, if you will, on how we did our serverless journey, because it was not smooth, it was not linear. So go ahead and check that out. We'll touch on a lot of that in this conversation, but it'll be more high level.
It'll be the cliff notes. And I
Yeah.
think when we were talking, Robbie, you mentioned how that conversation with Sheen made you realize what the serverless community is like. I wanted to just have you share that with the audience too.
The best, I didn't know that this would happen, but the best part about joining or adopting serverless is definitely the community. As you guys all know, it is the best community. We party the hardest, as we did in Vegas, but everyone is just super nice. Even if we don't agree, because not everyone agrees on the way to do things. Alex, Yan, they have their opinions on things, but everyone is super nice and respectful to each other. And they're also understanding there's trade-offs to everything, and it's just very welcoming community. You don't feel like, hey, I'm not good enough to be here. So I think we can all agree it is the best community out there, and it's one of the best parts about adopting it for a company.
Hmm. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back to 2017. We'll dive into your career a little bit more too, but let's in 2017, tell us what's going on at Taco Bell.
Yeah, so 2017 was well before any digital transformation, if you want to call it. So there was not much technology. The technology at Taco Bell is very supportive, very off-the-shelf software. And it's a non-technical company. It's a very good definition of that. So I really didn't know what to expect. I was we'll get into my background a little bit more, but I was a hardcore .NET developer, similar to Alan. And I was in my toolbox and my hammer of SQL Server and .NET. And I was seeing what was happening outside, um, that AWS and cloud was kind of becoming this thing. But I knew my company was never going to go to it. So Taco Bell itself, I think they were starting to like the very, very beginning part of a digital transformation. So they were looking to hire some people to come into the company. So, they're a big business in the US. If you guys don't know it, if there's people here globally, there's 7,000 plus US restaurants. They do 42 million customers per week. It is a marketing machine, as we talked about for 10 minutes about the commercials and movies and operations and food. Tech was not yet a business driver there. So you can imagine, to set the stage, what it might be like for someone like me as a tech person to go into Taco Bell. But that's kind of where it was at in 2017.
I figured you were at a big company when you said that you hadn't solicited approvals yet before you said yes to Sheen for his book, because that's what it is like to be at an enterprise, right? Like things require a lot of permissions, and you got to move at the pace of the business as well. But tell me a little bit about your background, like right before, like more about how .NET became your hammer, and what were your expertise before you started at Taco Bell.
Yeah, so 2004, 2005, I started my career at a .NET SaaS shop. So it was a technology company. They didn't call themselves that, but the product was SaaS, right? So it was software. Um, Really at the time, this is before even VMs. Like we did VMs a little later. It was really very much you were stuck to the tools you had. Books, documentation. I mean, the internet was there, but it was nothing like it is today. So my hammer, and I was a little bit more of a specialist on the SQL Server side, but I also did a fair bit of C Sharp. I use that SQL Server way like for everything, right? Things that shouldn't have been used for, but that was my background. Um, could have stayed there for my whole career. They weren't moving forward towards the cloud as fast as I wanted to. So again, I kind of felt like I learned everything I could. I needed to, spread my wings a little bit and see what's out there. Taco Bell had the job opening. I lived in Irvine, the same city as the headquarters. I was like, I forgot that Taco Bell was here. And this looks really interesting because it said AWS all over the place. Like, come in and do AWS, like autonomy and like, all these things. So it said the right things. It was more for a data position, but I said, hey, I'll take it. I want to see what this is like. So, I mean, my background .NET coming into it, didn't know what I was walking to. I'll tell you that to talk about.
Well, so you brought the SaaS with you to Taco Bell, and it said all about AWS, but I assume that and you set up the stage where they want to do a little bit more of the software investment and so forth. For this digital transformation that Taco Bell brought you in for in the data role, how large of an army were you equipped with to go pull off this massive undertaking?
Yeah. I thought there'd be like hundreds. I didn't know what to expect, how big the team would be, right? So under five, I would say, probably two or three like real engineers like me were there, and I came in and was like, okay, what do we want to do? And then a month in, they're like, hey, we just signed this big deal with a major delivery provider where we need to integrate our menu data into their system. It was in the news, and there's like by June, it was like 2 months away or something. And I was like, okay, there's already a deadline. And there was no team. And they asked if I wanted to do it because they saw that I had like a lot of experience with like integration. It was like a middleware integration system. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I will say yes and see what happens. I had one other guy, a contractor, his name was Hardik, but it was me and him was the team. So it was definitely not a two pizza team. We had plenty of pizza. It was just two.
Must have had a pretty large appetite to finish two pizzas on just with the two of you. So, but was the stack pretty modern at the time? Because it said AWS all over the job description. So I'm assuming that this was maybe it was .NET, but a pretty reasonably orchestrated and decoupled stack that you were integrating with this menu setup.
There was nothing there, right? So like nothing, there was no technology that existed, which was kind of good. It felt like a startup in a sense, right? There was no preconceived notions you had to do it this way. It was really like, do whatever you need to do. We need to get this done. The definition of a business problem and like, no, we had the constraints on the resources, right? But it was like, do whatever you need to do to get it done. And you could use AWS for that. The challenge is there though, right? I told you 7,000 plus restaurants, millions of these pricing rules. You have to get the data from all these different places. So that's be correct. and it does have to scale in these bursts to ingest the menu into this delivery provider. So there were challenges there that we saw. But at this point, I didn't know what serverless was at all. I had heard about it. I didn't know AWS at all. I literally had zero knowledge. I was like learning as I was going. Cloud Guru, I signed up. And so I started going down the EC2 and even container route first. And of course, I set up an RDS, but I didn't do SQL Server. I set up MySQL. So I didn't even like think about DynamoDB. That was too crazy for me.
Got it. So you show up and you said like millions of pricing rules. I say more about that. Like a bean burrito at the time, I think costed $1. Like it cost $1 everywhere, right?
Yeah, no, so that's not the case. The franchisees can set their pricing, so they do set their pricing. And there's just, there's exceptions to the rule, right, that exists. So it actually becomes quite a large amount of data that needs to be integrated, timely and properly. So I did what I knew, and I set up a database to get that data in there. It was a relational database. But again, I had no idea how to do any of this in AWS. Luckily, at the same time, we were setting up an e-commerce platform, and we'll talk about that later because I was done on a job on Monolith. But they let me borrow a DevOps engineer to help just set up like the VPCs and security groups because like that was, and it struck me at that moment. It took so long and there was so much work before anything was written to actually solve the business problem, right? And I was like, and it felt so brittle and complicated. I never had to worry about it in the past. I had sysadmin folks that did that, but I had no choice. It was me and another person. We had to do everything.
And then what happened? So you're in there, you're learning AWS for the first time. Dynamo is too crazy. I just realized there's a recording of me saying that now.
Yeah.
But
He's probably over there leading it. I don't know at the time. I was like, dude, I am
yeah.
scared of that.
So what, how did the progress happen? Like what did you do to pull this off?
Yeah, so for this first project, we had to use some existing kind of commercial software for integration that sat on EC2s. So I already saw issues with that, with the EC2s running out of memory whenever we had to like generate more than a few hundred of these menus. We did a very quick POC to see how we could do this. Immediately, I'm like, we need to scale better, or like there has to be a better way to scale here. So I saw serverless. I was reading about it and I was trying to learn it. Again, it was in 2018, so it wasn't the way it is now. There's a lot more documentation and people talking about it. Slightly Wild West. I actually wrote in .NET. I ported over what I was writing in .NET and C# to literally just like a monolithic Lambda function to generate these menus and send them out. And again, this is anti-patterns everywhere. You can assume, like zipping these things up, uploading it to the cloud, just like get it out there and see if it'll work. But the
It could have
cool
been
thing,
worse. You could have been writing the code in the console. You could do that too.
yeah, but it was scaling beautifully. I was like, oh wow. And then I used SQS a little bit, and then I had S3, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to worry about these components. I was still talking to an RDS in the VPC, so that has its issues, but overall it was beautifully scaling. And the parts that were killing me was like the EC2s and all the stuff with the VPC, and I didn't set up the NAT gateway, and it was just like, okay, starting to gravitate towards this serverless thing. So we found that initial success there, and we got the project done quickly within a few months with me and the other person. And
Did
that was
you
kind of
hit the
the first
deadline
step.
and the
We
quality
hit the 10,
parameters that were
we
set?
somehow hit the deadline. We got it out. It was successful. And I'll say that was like the first real like serverless success at the company.
So it sounds like you guys had an early win, and conveniently you had picked a project that was being written from scratch, and you had a tight deadline, so it was helpful. So now you're on this high, and suddenly 2020 happens. There was a magical thing or somewhat catastrophic thing that started to happen in 2020. Folks in the audience can probably guess what it was, but tell us a little bit about what happened in 2020 and how that changed the business.
Yeah, obviously it was a terrible time in the world when COVID hit. A lot of businesses, I'm sure most of you here felt it. The food industry, especially because basically all the restaurants closed. So imagine the 7,000 restaurants closed. There was a lot of uncertainty about the business at Taco Bell. And overnight, we saw that everyone starting wanting more delivery, right? Or at least pickup because they can't go in the store, right? Through the drive-through. At the time, we were only integrated in one of the delivery providers. So the stores were just like, we need to figure something out. So they got these tablet solutions, right? Like you can imagine Uber Eats or DoorDash or these tablets, and they'd have to double enter the orders, and there was mistakes all over the place, and it was just a terrible experience operationally. And they're like, this is not going to work, and we need to build something that takes the orders, integrates it directly into the POS devices so they could get sent to the kitchen for the food to be made. And it was really dire. You can imagine it was like, how would we do this? We need to do this yesterday. And, again, the challenge was posed to me and my team. Can we do this? And we had building up some wins on the serverless side and like step functions and all these things we started to dabble in. I'm like, I think we can build this really quickly and get this out and help the business. So that was kind of like the challenge. And we knew that we were going to do this 100% serverless from the start. We weren't going to even think about a single EC2 because we needed that agility, basically.
And how did that go? So you had to do all this integration. You didn't want to think about scaling. Were VPCs still involved here, or were you able to do this
Yeah,
all?
we're like, one of my rules is like, I don't even want the VPC in this new thing unless we absolutely need it. We didn't need it, right? So, yeah, it was a massive success. Like that talk I did 2 years ago with Sam, I dove into it, but essentially we were able to onboard those like 3 or 4 delivery aggregators within a few months. We built the system on step functions, incredibly flexible. It mapped out cleanly the business process, of the delivery orders and when they would come and pick up the food. And it was just so seamless and so nice to do it basically serverless first from the start on the true enterprise problem. And the exciting thing is when you can help the business and you help people, you're helping people get their food, but you're also helping the business and you're doing it using a cool technology stack. It's kind of like the perfect world. And it was really great to see it work.
And how did this help the business during the COVID times? Is it just through the velocity, or was the impact more than just being able to deliver features faster?
Yeah, so also like we had to iterate and add features as fast as we could during that period of time because we were pivoting constantly. So being on serverless obviously allows that instead of long periods before you have to get the code to production. But it really helped the business because like consumers changed overnight and we had to switch pretty much overnight as fast as we could. So really set us up like the digital explosion then, like we were fully in it at this point, and now you're talking the business is exploding on the digital side after 2020. And we knew we were going to be able to build more things because we were starting to make money for the company using digital. And we made the decision we're going to do everything going forward serverless first, unless there was a really good reason to use VPCs and things like that.
And tell us a little bit more about your stack. Are you still, by this time, is this still a .NET heavy stack? Have you changed languages? Seems like you were able to get rid of the VPCs, but what other parts of the stack changed?
Yeah, I'm happy to say I was the only one that had those .NET Lambdas. I mean, there's nothing against it. I love it. That's how I started my career. But everyone else, we moved on to being basically a Node TypeScript shop. Some Python for like the data engineers and things like that. But it was just easier. And there's more support, obviously, for those languages. So anything net new was built using mainly TypeScript and Node. The nice thing is it's so modular and it's okay. You can do that and you can swap out those .NET components if you want, or you can leave them if they work well. We still use a lot of them. It's not a monolith to begin with, right? It's a distributed kind of composed system.
Got it. And by the way, just like I don't have anything against .NET. I don't think you do either. I think it's more my observation was .NET did not always get the latest features fastest in AWS at the time. I think that problem has largely been solved. But in the startup world, I saw a lot more customers using .NET than I ever
Oh, cool.
anticipated uh, as well. So so you're using .NET to TypeScript and you're able to change the language. But what about your orchestration layer? What did you use for choreography? What are the other components in the stack at this point?
Yeah, so at that point, being all in basically on serverless step functions, we don't use it all the time, but we're starting to use it more and more. There's trade-offs with everything, right? It's kind of easier to do a lot in the Lambda, but we do use step functions when it makes sense. Event Bridge is now a core part of the system. There's a lot of great stuff, I'm sure, in Sheen's book on that, but Event Bridge is an amazing service in my opinion. So that's really a core of anything new we build. being event driven. And we can talk about the e-commerce platform later. But yeah, we do use basically those core AWS serverless services for everything.
What's your experience been like on EventBridge?
So far, really good. I mean, in the beginning, so like it's changed. It's gotten a lot better, right? The ecosystem in 2017, 2018, you'd have to do a lot of SNS to, some weird patterns sometimes that now it's quite easy with like EventBridge and some of the new features. So we've grown with AWS as they release new features. I look back at some of the stuff I did. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. It works. But then I don't get too hard on myself because AWS hadn't built some of the things that are available now. You can do, and we can talk about it later. You can do serverless, I won't say wrong, but in a way that makes it like a monolithic Lambda. We did that pattern a lot in the beginning, and then we moved away from that.
Yeah, and oftentimes, when you're trying to accelerate innovation, you're trying to get stuff out the door, you make trade-offs, and sometimes you make cost trade-offs. You're willing to spend more to let the business survive, and get things out the door quickly, and you can optimize later. And one of the common objections in serverless also is that it could be really, really expensive. So I'm curious how you thought about the cost, the infrastructure cost, as you were going through this migration and writing new capabilities with serverless.
Yeah, it's interesting. For us, it was always much cheaper to do things in serverless. And maybe our workloads are bursty. We don't need things running 24/7. It's not like 50,000 times a second, consistent, like internet scale, but there are severe bursts of marketing traffic. So all of our projections have always showed like 80 to 90% savings off an equivalent kind of EC2 based setup. So it was always fun for me to do. It's easy to do the projections, and finance love that because I can be like, well, how many do you expect to do? And you can calculate per transaction, very consistent in how you can do FinOps planning. It was really shot in the dark before, when you had a bunch of servers, you're like, well, if we're running them all the time at this instance size, it's probably going to cost X amount. With serverless, you can get pretty exact on what it's going to cost. So that order middleware solution I told you about when I had to get the delivery aggregators on really quickly, I already knew what it was going to cost before it even was released, and it was always feasible economically.
And so it sounds like because you had a bursty load, um, the cost dynamics were fine. Like you didn't end up spending more for serverless, but um, and it's just because you've got that seasonal peak. Like people, I'm assuming more people come in for lunch and for dinner, so that's when you see your peaks. And serverless was allowing you to absorb those without having more capacity. Is that what you mean by the burst, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, we can talk more on the recent project we did on the e-commerce migration. So we went from a very archaic Java monolith. So this was the last big thing we tackled the last 2 years. We moved away from a Java monolith e-commerce system. So like all the worst parts of a monolith we had to deal with on the e-commerce side. So 18 layers of abstraction to change like a description on a field. I'd literally have the Gang of Four book. Like, what is this? Why is this doing this here? Like, it was overly complex enterprise software, right? And all the problems you would get from this on our e-commerce platform, it would not scale well. It was incredibly expensive with the infrastructure and all that. So, happy to say we are fully serverless as well on e-commerce platform. And it was asked earlier how much volume we do. We do a lot of volume, obviously, and it's growing on our serverless platform. And we have something called Tuesday drops. I'll give you an example. Tuesday drops, I guess old enough to remember, like new albums would come out on Tuesday and things like that. So we have this where like new rewards come out on Tuesday that are very, very enticing to our customers. Marketing came up with it. And if they came up with this a few years ago, we would just fall over completely because they'll do a really incredible reward, but $5 off a Mexican pizza for 30 minutes, 2 o'clock. Right? So you get this, you could see it. It goes up like 20x the traffic at that time. We would have been hosed before. There's no way. You can't scale up fast enough. And we didn't want to have to deal with scaling things manually every Tuesday, and would be a pain. On serverless, I have not had to worry once. We've been able to handle these 20x bursts just like with no sweat. Um, that alone is like worth being on serverless because it's just so seamless, the scaling. And the business loves it. They get confidence. Marketing team loves it. They can do more crazy things because we know that the technology can support it. I don't want to say no to the business partners. Like they don't know what serverless is. They just care that they're able to do these Tuesday drops. And it's a really cool partnership that builds.
And did it sounds like it makes it easier for them to project their cost as well based on what you said earlier about, you being able to show each the cost of each transaction. Um, are you a serverless first organization now, or are you a serverless only organization? There's a fine line between becoming a serverless zealot and,
Yes.
considering serverless first. Like, so I'm curious where you land on that.
Yeah. I mean, I may seem like I'm a zealot and I just only want to do this going forward because I've seen the pain of what it was like before. But we are serverless first, which is different than serverless only because there may be a workload that comes up where it doesn't make sense to be Lambda, like 100%. I would assume maybe parts of it would be serverless, but I have nothing against Docker or Kubernetes. I don't want to be the one maintaining and working on that because it's really complex. I tried to do it myself and I abandoned it pretty quickly. I'm like, I am not smart enough for this. I need to stand on the shoulder of more giant, like the giants of serverless. Um, but there may be something that comes, and to solve the business problem, we will do what needs to be done. I do think it's always, we always will try to do it serverless first, though. We'll look to see if it makes sense. We look at it with that lens. Plus, we're building up, our capacity, our capabilities on serverless as a team. It's been really cool going from 2 developers to now, a lot more, maybe over 100 that all do serverless and love serverless. And like we built that grassroots thing here at Taco Bell.
I mean, it seems like you were able to get quick wins that gave you a little bit more license to do innovation and migration, and then you built that enough credibility now with the business where you can uh, take bigger risks on the technology side. So with these rapid fire successes with serverless, like what's next in your journey? And did it stop at something as simple as just adding more technology within Taco Bell, or what's next for you?
Yeah, so we are going to be doing whatever we can to support the business, the marketing, crazy ideas that they have. We want to make sure our technology is sound to be able to support that. In terms of tech wise, we are really going to ramp up testing. Obviously, we moved very quickly the last few years. So we're moving towards trying to get to like trunk-based development with feature flags and integration tests. Test was weird to me. I'll be honest, I didn't really understand it in serverless. We signed up for Yan Sway's book, and he's really, really great at with testing. So we're starting to see some benefits of tests. And we really want to incorporate that just to get the confidence level. If we make a change, we can even go faster to production. So that's one of the big things we're going to be working on.
Hmm. And Yum is like Taco Bell is part of Yum Brands, right? Like, tell us a little bit more about how the relationship works with like our
Mhm.
is your stack limited to Taco Bell, or does it help with the other Yum Brands as well?
Yeah, so Yum Brands actually they built this headless e-commerce system. So as part of our migration from the monolith, we actually plug in the Yum Brands as kind of like the back end for our e-commerce system. So they're a Kubernetes. They use Kubernetes. The great thing is they can do it their way. We work with serverless. We just connect through APIs. Everything works perfectly fine. The beautiful thing, like everything we do now, should be based on APIs. So it's really plug and play and composable. So by having them, build that headless commerce system, we're basically on the mock architecture, right? So microservices, API driven, cloud first, and headless. So it's very exciting to be on that because you can just like build the best of breed components for commerce. And then we're completely serverless on our side there.
And is digital like are people still ordering in store, or is digital the primary way to do things now? I've always been curious about that.
It will be in the few years. We feel like digital will be the primary, or more than half. Um, Especially younger people. I mean, that's just natural for them to order on the phone. Loyalty is a big push that we're going to continue to do. Make it really, really like these Tuesday drops, for example, joining the app. Um, so yeah, it's cool when you use the app to know that there is like this entire thing is completely serverless, at least on like the Taco Bell side that powers that. Their entire loyalty platform is serverless, super, super high scale, right? Millions and millions per day, synchronous event-driven events. That is enterprise level scale, in my opinion. So people who say you can't use an enterprise, like we're proof that it works very well, cost effective. What do they say? You can't be fast, good, and cheap. Yeah, right. Fast, good, and cheap. Those three. I feel like serverless, you can, and we've shown that.
And what advice would you have somebody who's just getting started on their serverless journey in an enterprise that may not have fully embraced the cloud or serverless for that matter?
Yeah, so you plugging the book. I do have a section on there with some of my tips, but one thing I would say is, the business partners, if you go to a non-technical company, especially, right, they don't really care about everything's an implementation detail. Like it's an implementation detail. They don't care. They want to make sure that the business problem is solved. So like I would always say, even if you want to get serverless used in your organization, show why from a business perspective. It's like laser focus on the business problem and always connected back to what you're trying to solve with the business. Like it's the North Star. You can get too caught up in doing these really low level things in the technology. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, the business has changed. You got to pivot again. Right. So that's why I love serverless, because I skip a lot of that stuff, the infrastructure, and it's already secure by nature. And I can pivot with the business quickly. And they'll catch on later. And once you show them that it's cost effective, we solved the business problem and we can manage and handle anything they come up with, then serverless will grow. I believe should grow in an organization. You're going to have people that don't like it though, or don't understand it, or they're used to doing a certain way. Again, I kind of got lucky because I came in and it wasn't like that. But from a business perspective, it makes sense, dollars and cents and speed and quality, right? To do serverless, I say.
So we'll open it up for questions from the audience too. I got all my questions answered. Thank you so much for letting me ask all my questions, but eager to hear if others have questions or comments on Robbie's journey.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I saw your AWS reInvent talk about how you started that and the process. I really enjoyed watching it. So what is the hardest part when you start working on this project? For example, you don't know AWS at that time, or you're not very familiar with, and just start from pretty much nothing to learn AWS and then work on the project and also meet the deadline.
I mean, I wasn't afraid to get help from again, the community is amazing. So I like literally went directly to I got lucky talking to Alex Debris. I'll tell you a story. My wife was working at a startup. And again, I'm like dabbling in serverless here. She's working at the startup and she's like, hey, do you know who Alex Debris is? He's helping me on this Lambda function for something. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I know who he is. Like I was more excited than meeting like a celebrity. I was like, so I emailed him and he was the nicest guy in the world. He helped me on solving stuff, just like no charge. He's just like, I couldn't figure it out. And he just was able to figure it out really quickly. How awesome is that you can reach out to community and they do that and they get back? Yan Sui, I actually owe Yan a lot because he wrote some of the first really in-depth articles on how to do things like how do you store parameters. I didn't know how to do that. You didn't want to put in plain text or even environment variables at the time. So he's like, it was mind blowing the stuff he was doing early on. So like, I really, really think the community, I don't think I would have been able to do it, as you said in the beginning, without that. And it was hard because it was still kind of early. So we did take a little bit of a risk, but it paid off, I'd say.
Okay. Thank you. Oh yeah, by the way, another question. How did you started deploying the infrastructure, the services? Did you use a CloudFormation or Terraform?
Yeah, I did in the console. No, I mean, maybe kind of did in the console, but we zipped them up. Like it was crazy. We were zipping them up. I wasn't even using SAM. I didn't even know where SAM, like I was Wild West, just like, we got to get this out there to solve this problem, right? Because at the end of the day, there is no job. There is no, like it had to get done. So it was crazy. It was fun. It was exciting. But I went back after and I'm like, okay, that's probably the wrong way to do it. So we evaluated SAM, serverless framework. Terraform just didn't seem very productive at the time for serverless, right? It was great for like setting up the rest of your infrastructure. So just because Yan wrote so much, we did serverless framework, but I did do SAM on some of my projects as well. We are looking into more CDK. Again, I don't really care how it's done. Like I let the teams do that because that's still just provisioning the things. Like I care about the code and are we solving the business problems? So I do think CDK will probably be what we use majority.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You just broke Alan's heart.
Sam man. I still like Sam.
Sam Squirrel like judgmentally looking at you.
I can't wait to talk to
he's right over
Alan
the
about
shoulder.
our .NET overly complex enterprise software days.
That's the worst. The worst.
And I'm a firm believer in keeping things really simple, by the way. Like you can start to put in my opinion, make things too complex. The beauty of serverless is, I think Alan wrote an article on this. I really liked it about, are we making this too complex? Like you don't need it to be, right? If you start adding layers and layers here and here, it's like, oh my God, we're going back to the old days of I have to crack the book open to understand what's happening. Because you just need to solve the problem. And I think we just need to make sure we don't get too complex. For the sake of complexity, right? It doesn't make any sense.
So I have a question. So do you use, I know you're pretty heavy on the AWS ecosystems. Do you use, apart from AWS, any other tool or anything which is pretty heavily you're using, or it's 100% AWS?
Funny you mentioned on the menu side, we actually use Momento for the caching, distributed caching, because we didn't find anything really serverless that we liked. So menu, we have a lot of things happening, like basically large JSONs that need to go back and forth, and Momento is great there. No, we're mainly AWS. We use Lamigo for our, I don't know if you have, for those who haven't used it, Lamigo is a observability platform. Observability can be kind of hard at first. I would say that was one of the things that was hard at first because we didn't have any tools. I forgot, X-Ray wasn't very good at the time. So you would be like tracing through these CloudWatch Insights didn't exist or whatever. So it's like the CloudWatch experience was brutal to figure out what was happening. So it was like a lot of overlogging and figuring out logging, throwing up the zip files to the cloud after you added the logging. So it was a wild west in Taco Bell. But we try to keep it mainly to AWS if we can, because it's just easier to not have to deal with like a brand new thing for people to learn and all that stuff. And AWS has like done a pretty good job of building out their services, I'd say.
Do you worry about any of the cost sides? You think about, hey, this is going out of, now we are spending so much money. Like in my example, me and Ben in our organizations, when we see the bill at the end of the month, when we see the CloudWatch, we spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah, we're releasing our CloudWatch loggings. Again, we use Lamigo and you can use other tools to go towards more tracing, but logs can get you. I'll tell you that. Logs can get you. So we try not to have them overlog, especially the logs that are just like, hey, I'm here. And it's like just overly chatty logs. Those add up. So we definitely reduce our logging a lot. It's kind of scary when CloudWatch is like the highest part of your bill and you're just like, Lambda's the cheapest part. Okay, something's weird here. So
yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. We're on that journey too, like just tuning the costs on that.
We feel better, when like in our organizations is pretty small, and when you're talking about a big organization and using the same technology which the small company like us is using,
yeah,
we feel better actually that, hey, we are on the right path actually.
Yeah, and we're doing things. I forgot to mention what we're going to do this year is, Lambda and serverless, they make it really easy to have like an active setup or an active passive setup. So it's really expensive to do that on a server full because you have these like kind of warm environments that have to be ready. For us, even though we're doing a ton of writes to Dynamo, we can have global tables set up in the two regions. And it's going to go live pretty soon, but we're like, I'm going to be able to sleep better at night knowing because US East 1, we all know. whatever reason, it goes down here and there. And it's the more you rely on AWS, the more it'll take down things. It's just natural, right? So I think that active, passive, active infrastructure is going to really, really like solve that last remaining resiliency kind of question that comes up.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
I have a question about how do you onboard new members to your team? Do they come? I mean, now that you have it's a little more established, maybe you get people that have had experience, but do you find that you have to onboard and like teach everyone serverless that joins your team?
Yeah, it's funny you say. One of the good things I did about all those talks and stuff is that now people kind of know to talk about the serverless, so that some people who have come who've done serverless, which is awesome. They're excited to work here. So it means it was worth it doing that, which I'm happy about. There are like interns or new people, like fresh graduates who've never, I feel bad for them if they have to go away from serverless if they leave, because they are basically born in the environment of serverless. And when they go back to figuring out how it used to be, when I tell them in 2005, they said that sounds horrible. And then the Java monolith, it's too easy for them now. That Java monolith is gone. I can't put them on that project. So we do have we have a cloud platform engineering team we started, which is, once we got big enough, we realized we need to start sharing back, and then kind of not telling everyone what to do, but basically like having kind of some templates, some documentation. A starter repo was really helpful. Basically, it's called TypeScript Starter. And it kind of has examples of lambdas that do all these common things, right? Talk to a DynamoDB, EventBridge, pull off something out there. And then you can run the debugger in VS Code and they walk through it, kind of showing them how to do it that way. We'll probably have them read Shane's new book and all that. But yeah, we do basically just put them on something right away. They get onboarded quick though. It's pretty cool. Definitely very different on that monolith. I'll just say one more thing on that. I tried 3 months to get it set up on my local computer, and I just gave up. I threw my computer out the window, basically, like Office Space. And with serverless, it's awesome. It's just like, I know what to expect. I can spin it up. That alone is just like so much more productive.
So follow-up question then, how does everyone get their own AWS sandbox, since are you writing and testing, on a live site, or do you try to run locally at all?
So we do have we have a non-prod account, so we don't break it up into everyone having its account in terms of dev QA stage, but we have a non-prod account, and then you have a separate prod account, and then we have a sandbox account where you can try stuff like Bedrock or something like that. We watch the cost there. We don't want someone to start something crazy like a really expensive SageMaker or something. But there's where you can really play around, and it's not going to hurt anyone. When you do, let's say you're working like the cart service, for example, what we do is we want them to branch off like the main, and then they can actually deploy a feature stack, like the stack they're working on. They can deploy it to non-prod. It'll inherit all the dev variables and environment parameters, so they can kind of test it there without impacting the main dev thing that other developers are looking at too. So you also like can develop locally using we used to use serverless, or we do use serverless framework. You can debug your code, you can invoke local, and then you can run your unit integration tests locally. So that's kind of our developer flow.
Yep, cool.
Just a question on that topic. So you don't have individual developer accounts that you're building in? You only do it locally, and then you go to some shared account?
Yeah, not every developer has an AWS account. They have a sandbox account, and then they develop their stuff locally against the non-prod account, and then they can deploy their feature stack that they're working on, like feature add, ICE modifier or something like that, and then they would deploy their feature stack to that non-prod account.
Curious, how many developers do you have that works?
It depends on the team. So we break up. So not everything in Taco Bell is in that single account. So it's really like domain driven. So like the e-commerce team would be there. Our loyalty team has their own HR. We have like an HR middleware team, order middleware team. So we break them up into their own kind of domains essentially. So it is a one big free for all. But yeah, no, I mean it depends. see, like maybe 10 to 15 on each like account domain.
Okay. I also have a different question. I think one of the things that makes your use of serverless really hit the sweet spot is your kind of your latency requirements. So I think that in the food industry, the timing of stuff is probably on the order of seconds versus hundreds of milliseconds or something. How much of your APIs have to be fast, and how much of these like event-driven step function flows can take their own sweet time and be okay?
You hit it on the head. The first big projects we did were basically background middleware kind of asynchronous things. So they could take their time, especially on .NET in the beginning, they could take their time to warm up, 8 seconds. And then they would go. But then we moved towards like, if we're going to go serverless first, there's real synchronous things. Like if you go on the site or on the app and you click buttons, it's calling Lambda functions. So it's not like microsecond level, but the if I look at my dashboard here, our cold start, we're like 99.96% warm. I'm looking at here. So like very, very, very few cold starts, and they're really pretty short because we use the lightweight. That's why we moved away from like .NET to Node. So it's like not even noticeable to the customer for the synchronous stuff. Like calling your dashboard, if no one had run anything and you did it maybe at 2 in the morning and everything went down, so that's like it was a fresh fleet of Lambdas, you'd maybe notice a tiny bit of slowness. But there's a 99.96% chance during the day that it's just instantaneous when you hit a synchronous call.
So even though I get excited about cold starts, I wasn't specifically asking about cold starts here. It was more kind of in general, those APIs that are hit by a customer, like what is your latency? Is it like
it could be
200
like
or 500 milliseconds?
Yeah,
or what
like
is
500
what are you looking
milliseconds,
at? Okay.
like or something like that or less. It's not really too noticeable by the customer.
Okay.
So we believe in not over optimizing. 80% approach is one thing we call it, or don't let perfect get in the way of great or a good, because it really doesn't matter after a certain point. And then we'll iterate if we need to and optimize. So a lot of times they'll get stuck on trying to make something perfect, and I'll go in there as their director and be like, it's okay, it's not as fast as you think it can be. It's okay, your code is not as clever as you. I don't want it to be clever. I want it to be a clear for loop so I understand what's going on and I can debug it. So we really try to make explicit, clear, and good enough kind of the practice, because like, again, that will allow us to be more agile and push things out and try things faster.
Yeah, I agree with that approach. I think the thing that I've seen that works pretty well for people is they have this TP99 budget where they look at their graphs weekly, look at something that's taking a bunch of time and spend a little bit of time improving that, but not upfront.
Yeah, we have
basing it on the data.
Exactly, yeah. And once we go live, like with the e-commerce platform, we saw some things that we needed to fix right away that didn't have caching or and then we'll get it to a place of good enough, like let's say under 500 milliseconds that the customer is going to be happy with. And it's very consistent, which is awesome, right? It's not like they're all pounding a single EC2 server or whatever. It's just like spread out across the Lambda fleet. So it's very consistent, which is great. That 500 millisecond will be mostly, like almost all the time, the same. So when you fix it, it's very consistent that it gets faster. Yeah. What's up?
Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, one concern, we often hear from customers, or potentially like you might want to label it an unsolved problem in the serverless space with respect to these event-driven architectures, is concerns around like schema validation of those events, specifically if they're flowing like cross-account, like event bus to event bus, between teams that like don't work closely with one another, but rely on those events to flow cross account. Robbie, in your usage of these event-driven architectures, like have you seen that challenge firsthand? And if so, like how have you solved it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely varies by the team that's producing the events. We're definitely trying to make sure like internally we have better documentation and using kind of some of the built-in stuff maybe in EventBridge for that schema discovery. For Yum, who built the back-end commerce engine for us, they had pretty robust documentation about the events, and so it was pretty clear. But nothing too automated. It always could be better, but it is definitely a challenge when you start to rely on them for like core business logic in your functions.
Speaking of events, next, I noticed that when you talked about the Tuesday drops, Ben Pyle just had this big smile on his face, and but conveniently, Ben is going to be doing an event next week at this hour. Kelsey just posted the link to his session as well. He's going to be talking a little bit about observability in a electronic health record system. So just wanted to plug that and let people know more about it and get registered. Tell your friends about it as well. Ben, anything to add to about your session?
Yeah, I got excited about the Tuesday music drops because I remember when records and cassettes and then CDs came out. So those were always really exciting. So yeah, next week we'll dive into the three pillars of observability, how to monitor and look at serverless compute, how to apply some of those principles to metrics and monitors, and how you can look at different serverless things like step functions. Looking at measurement around SQS and other parts of the serverless ecosystem. Then we'll talk a little about how we've done that at Khawaja Solutions, which is a electronic health record. So highly regulated industry, lots of PHI, lots of HIPAA data, and serverless has been plenty secure and observable for us. So another use case around, it might be in a different domain, and we also have similar bursty traffic that happens, and so the workload works out really well.
Robbie, you said something really exciting and inspirational at the beginning, in that the serverless community is one where people feel safe and everybody kind of propels each other. Thank you for being a good example of that, and for sharing your story. I know you're available on Discord, but I really appreciate you taking the time, being a champion in the community, and for sharing your story.
It was my pleasure. You guys can reach out on LinkedIn. Pick up that book from Sheen. Definitely, I think it's going to be great. I can't wait to read it. So it's available on not LinkedIn, on Amazon, the Kindle version.